There's a kind of silence you can only find in a walk-in freezer. It's a dead quiet, where the only sound is the hum of the fans and the blood rushing in your own ears. My name is Maddox. This happened in 2014, when I was working at a Walmart in a small town surrounded by miles of empty highway. My job was stocking the frozen food section, which meant I spent hours inside that giant, ice-caked box. I didn't mind it. The cold kept me awake better than coffee, and the silence was a break from the constant beeping of registers and the squeak of cartwheels out on the main floor. The freezer was my little kingdom of ice and quiet. The job was simple. You take a pallet of frozen pizzas or vegetables, you wheel it into the freezer, and you find a place for it on the tall metal shelves that reached up to the ceiling. The air was always thick with a frosty mist, and my breath would hang in front of my face in a white cloud. I wore a heavy company-issued parka, but the cold always found a way in, seeping into my bones. It started about a month into the job. I was deep in the back of the freezer, trying to make room for a new shipment of ice cream. I was moving boxes around when I heard it, a soft tap-tap-tapping sound. I stopped and listened. The fans hummed. Nothing else. I figured it was just a piece of ice falling from the ceiling or the building settling. It's an old building, I told myself. Buildings make noise. I went back to work, the sound forgotten, but the next night, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. It was faint, but clear. It seemed to be coming from the very back wall, which was hidden behind a 10-foot-high wall of stacked boxes. This time it sounded more deliberate, less random. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice was swallowed by the cold. There was no answer, just the hum of the fans. I felt a little prickle of unease. There was nobody else on my team working in Frozen that night. I was completely alone. I tried to tell a night shift worker about it, a woman named Zella. She was tough, had been working there for years, and had seen it all. She just laughed. "It's the ice maker, kid, or rats. Probably rats." I wanted to believe her, but the sound wasn't like a machine, and it was too rhythmic for an animal. The tapping continued every night for a week, always from the same spot. It was starting to get to me. I'd find myself listening for it, waiting for it. The silence in the freezer wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt heavy, like it was waiting for something. One night, I was trying to ignore it when the rhythm changed. It wasn't just tapping anymore. It was a pattern. Tap, 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 tap. It sounded familiar. It sounded like a code. It sounded like S-O-S. My blood went cold. I dropped the box of frozen fries I was holding. It hit the concrete floor with a loud thud. The tapping stopped instantly. I stood there for a full minute, my heart pounding, but the silence was absolute. I slowly backed out of the freezer, my eyes locked on the wall of boxes at the back. I didn't go back in for the rest of my shift. The next night, I knew I had to see what was back there. I couldn't stand it anymore. I spent the first 2 hours of my shift moving the heavy pallets of frozen food away from the back wall. It was hard work, my muscles aching from the cold and the strain. Finally, I had cleared a narrow path. The back wall was just a sheet of thick, white frost. I shone my flashlight on it, and that's when I saw the scratches. They were thin lines, carved into the layers of ice. They looked like drawings a little kid would make. There was a crooked-looking house, a stick figure of a person, and a sun with wavy lines coming off it. Underneath the drawings were words, scratched in messy, childish letters. "I'm cold." I stumbled backward, my mind racing. Who could have done this? No customer could get back here. No other employee would have a reason to. It looked like it had been there for a long time, buried under the frost. I got out of there, my mind reeling. I didn't tell Zella. She'd think I was crazy. My final night there, I had no choice but to go back into the freezer. A huge truck had arrived, and there was nowhere else to put the shipment. I tried to stay near the front, near the door, but I had to organize the back shelves. I took a deep breath and wheeled the pallet jack into the cold mist. I kept my back to the door, trying to work as fast as I could. I was putting a box on a shelf when I heard a loud clang behind me. I spun around. The heavy freezer door was shut. A wave of panic washed over me. The door was incredibly heavy. It couldn't have swung shut on its own. I ran to it and pushed. It didn't budge. I looked for the emergency release lever on the inside. It was an old freezer. There wasn't one. I was trapped. "Hey," I yelled, banging on the thick metal with my fists. "Let me out. Is anyone out there?" Then, the lights in the freezer flickered, once, twice, and went out. I was plunged into absolute darkness and bone-chilling cold. Panic seized me. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers numb and clumsy. I finally got the flashlight on. The small beam cut through the darkness. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was right behind me. It wasn't coming from the wall anymore. It was inside the freezer with me. I spun around, shining my light into the frosty air. And then I heard a voice. A small, weak whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "It's so cold." My light beam shook as my hand trembled. I swept it across the empty shelves, the frozen boxes, the frosted floor. My light landed on the back corner, where the drawings had been. There was a small figure huddled there. It looked like a child, no bigger than 7 or 8 years old, wearing thin, old-fashioned clothes. Its skin was a pale, bluish gray, and it was covered in a fine layer of frost. It was hugging its knees to its chest, shivering violently. It slowly lifted its head to look at me. Its face was thin and pale, but its eyes were just dark, empty sockets, black holes in its small frozen face. A scream tore from my throat. I threw myself at the door, pounding on it with my bare hands, not even feeling the cold as my skin stuck to the frozen metal. "Help me! Someone please let me out!" The whispering voice came again, closer this time. "Can you help me? I can't get warm." I didn't stop screaming. I just kept hammering on the door, my mind broken with terror. Finally, I heard shouting from the other side, and the sound of someone fumbling with the latch. The door creaked open, and light flooded in. Zella stood there, her eyes wide with alarm. I fell out onto the floor, gasping and shivering. "Did you see it?" I choked out, pointing a trembling finger back into the freezer. "The kid. There was a kid in there." Zella looked inside. She walked in, looked around, and came back out, shaking her head. "Maddox, there's nobody in there. The place is empty." I didn't believe her. I scrambled to my feet and looked. She was right. The freezer was empty. The small figure was gone. I looked at the back wall where the drawings had been. The wall was smooth. The scratches had vanished. My hands were red and raw from the cold, the first signs of frostbite already setting in. I never went back. I left my parka on the floor and walked out of that store for the last time. I don't know the story of that place, but I know some things don't stay buried, and some souls never, ever get warm. The garden center at Walmart always felt like a different world, especially on the night shift. My name is Sterling, and back in 2005, that was my domain. While the rest of the overnight crew was inside under the harsh fluorescent lights, I was outside, under the moon and the thin plastic roof of the garden section. It was usually peaceful. The air smelled like damp earth and fertilizer instead of floor polish. The only sounds were the crickets and the hum of the highway in the distance. I liked the solitude. I liked being surrounded by living things. It was just me, the plants, and a few hundred garden gnomes. My job was mostly watering. I'd drag the long green hose from one end of the center to the other, giving everything a good soak. I'd restock the big heavy bags of mulch and soil, and make sure the shelves of ceramic pots were neat. It was physical work, but it was simple. The gnomes were just part of the scenery. There were rows of them on a big display shelf. Gnomes fishing, gnomes sleeping, gnomes pushing little wheelbarrows. They had cheerful, painted-on smiles and bright, glassy eyes. They were just goofy-looking lawn ornaments. That's all they were. The first time I noticed something was off, it was small. I came in for my shift and saw that one of the gnomes, a fat one holding a tiny shovel, was turned around, facing the back of the shelf. I chuckled, figuring one of the daytime employees was messing with me. I turned it back around and thought nothing of it, but it kept happening. Every night, I'd find 1 or 2 gnomes in a different position. One that was on the left side of the shelf would be on the right. 2 gnomes that were separate would be placed side by side, as if they were having a conversation. It was a little weird, but I brushed it off as a prank. I started leaving them a note. "Very funny," I wrote on a piece of cardboard. The next night, the note was gone, and 3 gnomes were now on the floor, arranged in a perfect triangle. That's when it stopped feeling funny. There was no way the wind could have done that. They were heavy, made of solid concrete. I started to get a weird feeling whenever I was near the gnome display. A feeling of being watched. I'd be watering the petunias and I'd get this powerful urge to look over my shoulder. When I did, it felt like all those little glass eyes were staring right at me. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was just letting my imagination get the better of me in the quiet of the night. I decided to put an end to it. I took every single gnome and lined them up perfectly, all facing forward. I even took a picture with my old flip phone to prove it. I was determined to catch whoever was doing this. The next night, my heart dropped into my stomach. Every single gnome had been turned to face the main sliding glass door that led into the store. They were all standing at attention, like a tiny ceramic army waiting for an order. The hair on my arm stood up. This wasn't a prank anymore. This was something else. The night it all came to a head. A big thunderstorm was rolling in. The sky was a dark, angry purple, and you could hear the thunder rumbling in the distance. I tried to work fast, wanting to get all the watering done before the storm hit. The wind was howling, making the plastic roof panels rattle and shake. I was getting nervous. The garden center didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt exposed. I was in the middle of restocking birdseed when the lights flickered violently and then went out with a loud buzz. I was plunged into darkness, with only the occasional flash of lightning to see by. My flashlight was in the little office shed on the other side of the garden center. I was blind. Another flash of lightning lit up the area, and I saw them. The gnomes were no longer on their shelves. They were on the floor, all of them, and they were scattered across the main walkway, between me and the office. My breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen, listening to the rain hammer down on the roof. I took a tentative step forward, my hands outstretched in the dark. Another flash of lightning. A gnome that was 10 feet away was now only 5 feet away. Its cheerful, painted smile looked like a twisted grin in the stark light. It was looking right at me. I started to move faster, stumbling over bags of soil. With every flash of lightning, they were closer. They weren't moving in a way that made sense. I never saw them walk or crawl. They were just there. In one flash, they'd be in one spot. In the next, they'd be feet closer, in a completely different arrangement. It was like they were playing a terrifying game of statues with me. Scrape, the sound of concrete on concrete, right behind me. I spun around, fumbling in my pockets for my keys. Anything. Another flash of lightning revealed a gnome right at my heels, its little fishing rod almost touching my leg. I let out a yell and kicked it. It flew across the aisle and shattered against a stack of terracotta pots. The sound of the shattering gnome was followed by a sudden, complete silence. The wind died down. The rain seemed to stop. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then came the scraping. From all around me, 100 little scraping sounds. Closing in. I ran. I just bolted in the direction of the office shed, not caring what I ran into. A flash of lightning showed a wall of them in front of me, blocking my path. I veered to the right, crashing through a display of rose bushes, the thorns tearing at my clothes and skin. I finally reached the shed, my hand finding the doorknob. I threw the door open, dove inside, and slammed it shut, locking it behind me. I huddled in the corner of the tiny shed, listening. The scraping sounds were right outside the door. Then came the tapping. Tiny, hard taps all over the thin wooden walls and the door. Tap, tap, tap. It went on for what felt like hours. A relentless, terrifying rhythm against the backdrop of the storm. I stayed in that shed until the sun came up. When my manager arrived in the morning, the storm had passed. He found me in the shed, a shaking mess. When we stepped outside, everything was back to normal. The sun was shining, the plants were dripping with rain, and all the gnomes were back on their shelves, in perfect lines, smiling their stupid, cheerful smiles. The only one missing was the one I had kicked. There was just a pile of colored concrete dust on the floor. I never went back to the garden center again. I took a pay cut to work as a cashier inside the store, where the only thing that moved in the night was the automatic floor scrubber. They say every store has its ghosts. Usually, people are talking about the ghosts of past employees or customers, but at the Walmart I worked at, the ghost was the store itself. My name is Renwick, And this was in 2016. I was on the overnight maintenance crew at a store that was only a few years old. It was one of those shiny new supercenters with a grocery store, a pharmacy, and everything in between. It was supposed to be the model of modern retail. But from my first night, I knew something was fundamentally wrong with that building. My job was to run the floor scrubber, a big, loud machine that looked like a tiny Zamboni. I'd fill it with cleaning solution, and then for 8 hours, I'd just ride it up and down the long, empty aisles, leaving a clean, wet path behind me. The machine was so loud that I usually wore earplugs. It was just me and the hum of the engine, lost in a world of polished concrete and endless shelves. The weirdness started in the toy department. Every time I'd drive the scrubber down the main toy aisle, the one with all the dolls and action figures, my machine would die. The engine would just sputter and quit. The lights would go out, and I'd be left in the dark, surrounded by the silent, plastic faces of 1,000 toys. The first couple of times it happened, I just figured it was a mechanical issue. I'd call my supervisor, Quentin, and he'd help me get it started again. But it only ever happened in that one specific aisle, nowhere else in the entire massive store. Quentin thought it was a short in the machine's wiring, maybe triggered by some weird radio frequency from the store's security system. But I started to notice other things. After getting the machine started again, I'd often find that a toy had fallen off the shelf. Just one. A Barbie doll on the floor, or a teddy bear lying face down. I'd pick it up, put it back, and move on. But it was always in the exact spot where the scrubber had died. One night, I was determined to just get through the toy aisle without stopping. I got a running start, hoping momentum would carry me through whatever dead zone was there. As I entered the aisle, I felt the air get cold and heavy. The engine on the scrubber started to choke, just like always. But this time, I heard something over the dying motor. It was a giggle, a little girl's giggle, clear as day. I slammed on the brakes, and the machine died completely. The emergency lights at the end of the aisle cast long, creepy shadows. I pulled out my earplugs. The aisle was dead silent. There were no customers in the store. The only other employees were on the other side of the building. I was alone. I called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed off the shelves. No answer. I got off the scrubber, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I walked slowly down the aisle. Halfway down, lying in the middle of the floor, was one of those baby dolls that's designed to cry. Its plastic eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling. As I got closer, it started to make a noise. Not the crying it was supposed to make, but a soft, electronic whisper. "Play with me." I jumped back, my heart pounding. I know those dolls are motion activated, but this was different. The voice was distorted, glitchy. I shone my light on the doll's back. The battery cover was missing. There were no batteries inside it. I left the scrubber right where it was and found Quentin. I told him what happened. He was a practical guy, but he saw how scared I was. He came back with me to the toy aisle. The doll was still on the floor. He picked it up, looked at the empty battery compartment, and his face went pale. He didn't have an explanation. We just put the doll back on the shelf, pushed the heavy scrubber out of the aisle, and I finished my shift cleaning the grocery section. After that night, I refused to go down the main toy aisle. I'd clean all the aisles around it, but I left that one for the daytime crew. But the building didn't seem to like that. The strange things started happening in other parts of the store. I'd be in the pet food aisle, and I'd hear a faint barking sound, but the aisle would be empty. In the clothing department, I'd see a dress on a mannequin sway, as if someone had just walked past it, but there was no breeze. The store had a PA system that they used for announcements during the day. At night, it was always silent, but one night, it crackled to life. There was no announcement, just a sound. It was the faint, tinny sound of carnival music. The cheerful, creepy tune played for about 30 seconds and then stopped, replaced by a burst of static. Quentin and I just stared at each other from across the store. No one was near the PA system, controls. The final straw for me was about a month later. I was in the hardware department, far away from the toys. I was sweeping up some dust near the paint mixing station. The store was completely quiet except for the swish of my broom. Suddenly, I heard the unmistakable sound of a bouncing ball. Boing, boing, boing. It was coming from the next aisle over, the one with sporting goods. I peeked around the corner. A bright red rubber ball was bouncing by itself in the middle of the aisle. It would bounce up to about chest height, hit the floor, and bounce right back up, as if an invisible person was playing with it. I watched, frozen, as it bounced its way down the aisle, getting further and further away from me. It reached the end of the aisle, bounced one last time, and then just stopped, rolling to a halt under a shelf. Then I heard the giggle again, the same little girl's giggle from the toy aisle. This time it wasn't coming from one place. It was all around me. It was echoing through the hardware department, light and playful, but it was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. I dropped my broom and ran. I didn't even clock out. I just left my vest on a counter and walked out into the safety of the early morning light. That building wasn't just a building. It was a playground for something else. It was alive, and it wanted to play. And I knew that if I stayed, sooner or later, I was going to be its new favorite toy. There are some things you see that your brain just can't process. Moments that break the rules of how the world is supposed to work. My name is Olena, and in 2019, I worked as a night shift stalker in a Walmart that was known for being a little strange. It was an older store, one of the first in the area, and it had a reputation. People who worked there would tell stories about strange noises, things moving on their own, the usual stuff. I never believed any of it. I figured they were just trying to scare the new girl. I was wrong. My job was to stock health and beauty. That meant endless aisles of shampoo, makeup, and medicine. It was a quiet corner of the store, and my supervisor, a guy named Alaric, mostly left me alone. He was a lifer, someone who'd been with the company for 20 years. He had this calm, tired look on his face all the time, like nothing could surprise him anymore. One of my tasks was to zone the makeup aisle. That means you go through and make sure all the little boxes of lipstick and eyeshadow are pulled to the front of the shelf, making it look neat and full. It's tedious work. I was halfway down the aisle around 3 a.m., my mind in that numb, half-asleep state you get on the night shift. I was straightening a row of nail polish when I saw him out of the corner of my eye. He was at the far end of the aisle, looking at the lotions. He was a very tall, very thin man, wearing a dark, old-fashioned suit that looked out of place in a Walmart. What was really strange was his posture. He was standing perfectly straight, but he was leaning forward at an impossible angle, maybe 45 degrees. It was like he was defying gravity. It looked wrong. My brain couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. I blinked, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. When I opened them, he was still there, leaning. I stood up straight. "Sir, can I help you with anything?" I called out. He didn't turn his head. He just straightened up with a slow, fluid motion that was completely unnatural. He wasn't stiff. He moved like he was made of liquid. Then he turned to look at me. His face was long and pale, with no expression at all. His eyes were dark and seemed too big for his face. He just stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked silently out of the aisle. I never heard his footsteps. I stood there for a second, my heart racing. It was the strangest thing I'd ever seen. I walked down to the end of the aisle where he had been standing. There was nothing there. I tried to shake it off. Maybe the guy just had weird balance. I told Alaric about it when I saw him a little later. I expected him to laugh or tell me I was tired, but he just got very serious. "Tall guy? In a suit?" he asked. I nodded. "Don't talk to him," Alaric said, his voice low. "If you see him, you turn around and you walk the other way. You don't look at him. You don't acknowledge him. You understand me, Olena?" The warning scared me more than the man himself. I asked Alaric who he was. Alaric just shook his head. "He's just here sometimes. Been around for years. We just leave him be." I didn't see the man again for a few weeks. I almost managed to convince myself I had imagined him. Then came the night of the spill. Someone had dropped a huge bottle of juice in the main aisle, and Alaric asked me to come help clean it up. We were on our hands and knees, wiping up the sticky red liquid, when Alaric suddenly froze. He was staring at something behind me. I turned my head to look. Standing at the entrance to the grocery section was the tall man in the suit. But he wasn't just standing there this time. He was smiling. It was a huge, impossibly wide smile. stretched from ear to ear, filled with too many teeth. It was the smile of a predator. And he was looking right at us. "Don't look," Alaric whispered, his voice tight with fear. "Just keep cleaning. Pretend he's not there." I tried. I turned back to the spill, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper towels. I could feel his eyes on me. The feeling was heavy, suffocating. The air grew cold. After a minute that felt like a lifetime, I chanced a glance. He was gone. The last time I saw him was the night I quit. I was in the back, in the stockroom, pulling a pallet of new merchandise. The stockroom was a maze of tall metal shelves, and it was easy to get turned around. I was alone. The only sound, the hum of the overhead lights. I came around a corner, and he was there, standing right in the middle of the narrow aisle, blocking my path. He was closer than he'd ever been before, not more than 15 feet away. He wasn't leaning this time. He was just standing there, perfectly still. His face was blank again, no smile. I was trapped. I couldn't go forward, and I was too scared to turn my back on him to run. We just stood there, staring at each other in the humming silence of the stockroom. Then, he started to change. His limbs seemed to stretch, his arms and legs getting longer. His neck elongated, pushing his head up towards the ceiling. He grew taller and taller, his body contorting and twisting like it was made of rubber. The fabric of his suit stretched with him, never tearing. He unfolded himself until his head was touching the high ceiling of the stockroom, his body a thin, distorted line of black. His blank face looked down at me from an impossible height. That's when my mind just snapped. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My lungs wouldn't work. I just dropped to the floor, scrambled backward on my hands and feet, crab walking away from it. I didn't stop until my back hit the far wall. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for it to grab me. I waited for what felt like forever. When I finally dared to open my eyes, the aisle was empty. He was gone. I crawled my way out of the stockroom. I found Alaric and told him I was leaving. He didn't ask why. He just nodded, that same tired look on his face. He knew. He had seen things in that store too. I think we all had. Some places are just wrong. They're like magnets for things that don't belong in our world. And that Walmart, for whatever reason, was one of those places. It was a place where the shadows stretched a little too long, and where things that shouldn't be real walked the aisles in the dead of night. This all happened because I couldn't mind my own business. My name is Kalen, and this was back in the year 2018. I was part of the overnight crew at a Walmart that was open 24 hours a day. Unlike the other stalkers who worked the main aisles, I was assigned to the electronics department. It was usually pretty quiet. Most of my job involved zoning, making sure all the DVD cases were straight, the video games were in the right order, and the display TVs were all playing the same boring promotional loop. The strangest part of the job was handling returns. People would bring back the most random things in the middle of the night. Around 1 a.m., a man came to my counter. He was thin and pale, with dark circles under his eyes, and he was clutching a receipt in his hand like it was a winning lottery ticket. He wanted to return a television. That part was normal. The TV itself was not. It was an old tube television, the kind from before flat screens became common. It was incredibly heavy and bulky, with a wood grain finish and big, clunky dials for the channel and volume. I hadn't seen one like it in at least a decade. We certainly didn't sell them. "I can't take this back, sir," I said, trying to be polite. "We don't sell this model. The receipt must be for something else." He shook his head frantically. No, you have to take it. Please. I bought it here, a long time ago." He pushed the faded receipt toward me. I looked at it. It was from our store, but it was dated from the early 90s. "Sir, this receipt is over 20 years old," I said. "Our return policy is 90 days. I don't want a refund," he said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "You can keep the money. I can't have it in my house anymore. Just take it, please." He looked so genuinely terrified that I felt a bit sorry for him. My manager, Perrin, was a pretty relaxed guy. I figured I could just stick the TV in the back and ask him what to do with it later. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The man looked so relieved he almost cried. He helped me lift the heavy thing onto the counter, then turned and practically ran out of the store without another word. For the next hour, The TV just sat there. I tried to ignore it, but my eyes kept being drawn to its dark, blank screen. It felt like a void in the brightly lit department. Finally, my curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see if it even still worked. I found a spot on the back wall and plugged it in. The screen flickered to life with a loud burst of static. I fiddled with the dials, but no matter which one I turned, the screen showed nothing but that swirling gray and white snow. The sound was just a constant, hissing roar. I was about to unplug it when I noticed something odd. In the chaos of the static, I thought I saw a shape, a pattern. I leaned closer, squinting. It looked almost like a face, but it was distorted, stretched and pulled apart like clay. It was there for a second, then it vanished back into the noise. I shook my head, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me, but then I heard something else. Underneath the loud hiss of the static, it was a voice, a faint, muddled whisper coming from the speakers. I couldn't make out any words, but it was definitely a voice. I put my ear closer to the speaker, trying to listen. The whispering grew slightly louder, sounding like multiple voices talking over each other. A cold chill ran down my spine. I stood up straight and looked around the department. It was completely empty. I was the only person there. The display TVs on the opposite wall were all playing a silent video of a tropical beach. The only sound was the static from the old television. I told myself it was just interference, maybe a radio signal getting picked up by the old technology, but I didn't believe it. I decided to leave it alone. I went back to my work, trying to put the creepy TV out of my mind, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every few minutes I would glance back at the TV, with its screen full of dancing static. Near the end of my shift, I was tidying up the security camera aisle. From there, I had a clear view of one of the store's monitors. It showed a live feed from the camera pointed directly at the electronics counter. I could see myself on the screen, organizing boxes, and I could see the old TV, sitting on the counter behind me, its screen filled with static. I watched for a moment, and then my heart stopped. On the monitor, on the screen of the old television, I could see a figure. It was standing directly behind my image on the security feed. It was a tall, dark shadow, featureless and still. I whipped my head around to look at the real counter behind me. There was nothing there, just the TV and an empty aisle. My hands started to tremble. I looked back at the security monitor. The scene was the same. Me, the counter, the TV. But now, the shadowy figure on the TV screen had moved. It was closer to my on-screen self, its formless head tilted as if it were looking right at me. I could feel the blood drain from my face. It was in the TV, and it was watching me. I didn't think. I just reacted. I ran to the back wall and ripped the plug out of the socket. The TV screen went black with a final, loud pop. The hissing static was replaced by a deafening silence. I stood there for a long time, my heart pounding against my ribs, just staring at the dead screen. When Perrin came to check on me an hour later, I told him what I saw. He just laughed and said I needed more sleep. The next day, he had some of the other workers take the old TV out to the dumpster. They said it was just a broken piece of junk, but I don't think it was broken, and I don't think throwing it away got rid of what was inside. Sometimes, when I'm in a store late at night and I catch my reflection in a dark screen, I still look over my shoulder, just to make sure I'm really alone. We go to a part of the store most people never get to see. My name is Orville, and my time working the night shift at Walmart was in the year 2019. I wasn't a stalker like most of the other overnight crew. I had what I thought was the best job in the whole place. I drove the floor scrubber. It was one of those big, ride-on machines, almost like a small Zamboni. My shift started after the store closed, and my entire job was to drive this machine up and down every single aisle, leaving behind a clean, glistening floor for the morning customers. I loved that job. I'm a solitary person by nature, and the work was perfect for me. I'd put on my headphones, listen to long podcasts, and just cruise through the empty store. There was a peaceful, meditative quality to it. The steady hum of the machine, the methodical back-and-forth pattern, the way the bright fluorescent lights reflected off the wet floor in my wake. It was like I was the captain of a ship, navigating a silent, sleeping world. The store was my ocean, and I knew its currents and coastlines by heart. The first few months were exactly that, peaceful and predictable. My only real interaction was with my supervisor at the beginning of the shift, and sometimes a brief nod to one of the stalkers, a quiet guy named Silas, if our paths happened to cross. For the most part, I was completely on my own, and that's how I liked it. The strangeness started small, so small I didn't even register it as strange at first. I would finish cleaning an aisle, let's say, the soup aisle. It would be perfect. The floor would be spotless, still damp from my machine. I'd move on to the next aisle, and then the next. But when my route looped me back around past the soup aisle maybe 10 minutes later, I'd notice something on the floor. A single can of tomato soup, sitting right in the middle of the aisle, in the very spot I had just cleaned. The first time, I just figured it had rolled off a shelf. I got off my machine, picked it up, and put it back. The second time it happened, a few nights later in the cereal aisle, I was a little annoyed. I figured Silas or one of the other guys was being sloppy, dropping things and not bothering to pick them up. It was frustrating to have my perfect work messed up, but it was just a minor irritation. But then the pattern changed. The misplaced items stopped seeming random. One night, I found 3 bars of soap on the floor in the health and beauty aisle. They weren't just dropped. They were arranged in a perfect, neat little row. Another night, in the hardware section, a handful of bolts were placed on the floor to form a small, perfect circle. This was different. This wasn't carelessness. This was deliberate. It felt like someone was playing a prank on me, leaving these little arrangements for me to find on my clean floors. I asked Silas about it, but he just gave me a blank look and swore he hadn't seen anything. I believed him. He wasn't the type for pranks. He barely even spoke. I tried to ignore it, but the pranks became more frequent and more unsettling. I started feeling like I was being watched as I did my rounds. The quiet hum of my machine no longer felt peaceful. It just felt like it was masking other, quieter sounds. I started turning my music down, listening to the store itself. I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder, scanning the dark corners at the ends of the aisles. The feeling of solitude I once cherished had turned into a feeling of unnerving isolation. The night it all came to a head was a Tuesday. I was about halfway through my shift when I found a trail of cat food kibble on the floor. It started at the end of the pet aisle, which I had just cleaned, and led in a thin, deliberate line toward the heavy double doors that led to the back room. It was like someone had carefully placed each piece, one by one, to create a path leading somewhere I didn't want to go. My heart was pounding. This wasn't a joke anymore. This felt like a lure. I got off my machine and just stared at the trail. A cold dread washed over me. I felt like a character in a fairy tale, following a trail of breadcrumbs into the dark woods. I swept up the kibble with a dustpan, my hands shaking slightly, and dumped it in the trash. I told myself it was just Silas being weird. It had to be. An hour later, the low water light on my machine started blinking. It was time to refill the tank. The only place to do that was at the large utility sink in the back room. I had been trying to avoid going back there all night, but now I had no choice. The back room of a Walmart is a world of its own. It's a massive, cavernous space, much bigger than you'd think, filled with towering steel shelves that stretch all the way up to the high ceiling. These shelves are packed with pallets of merchandise, creating long, narrow canyons that are poorly lit and full of deep shadows. It's a maze in there, and at night, it's dead silent. I drove my machine through the double doors and into the echoing darkness of the back room. The only lights were the safety lights, which cast a dim, yellowy glow over everything. My machine's headlights cut a bright path through the gloom. I drove to the far wall where the utility sink was and shut off the engine. The sudden silence was absolute. It pressed in on my ears. I got out the heavy hose and started filling the tank, the sound of the rushing water seeming unnaturally loud. As I waited, I heard a noise from deep within the maze of shelves. Asterisk bounce. Asterisk. I froze, my hand tightening on the hose. Asterisk. Bounce. Bounce. Asterisk. It was the sound of a rubber ball. A small one, the kind a child would play with. It was slow, rhythmic, and echoing slightly in the huge, empty space. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small. "Is someone back here?" The bouncing stopped. The only sound was the water filling my tank. I waited, listening. for what felt like a lifetime. Nothing, I told myself. It was just my imagination, that the strange noises of the warehouse were getting to me. I finished filling the tank, coiled the hose, and climbed back onto my machine, eager to get back to the bright lights of the main store. I turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life. The headlights flashed on, illuminating the long, straight aisle that led back to the main entrance. And that's when I saw it. Standing at the far end of the aisle, half hidden in the shadow of a tall stack of boxes, was a figure. It was small, the size of a child, and it was holding a small, red ball. It was just a silhouette at first, but it was unmistakably the shape of a little kid. "Hey," I yelled, my voice shaking. "You're not supposed to be back here. Are you lost?" The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, perfectly still. I started to drive my machine slowly forward, thinking I needed to help this kid find their parents. As I got closer, my headlights lit up the figure more clearly. My blood turned to ice. The figure didn't have a face. Where the eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, there was just a smooth, pale, and completely blank surface. It was like an unfinished mannequin, but it was moving. It slowly lifted one of its hands and pointed a single, small finger directly at me. I slammed on the brakes, my mind screaming. The faceless child then dropped the red ball, but the ball didn't bounce. It landed on the concrete floor with a soft, sickening thud and began to roll toward me. It rolled silently, picking up speed, coming straight for my machine. There was no sound, just the terrifying image of this red ball gliding across the floor in the dark. I didn't wait to see what would happen when it reached me. I yanked the gear shift into reverse and stomped on the accelerator. The machine lurched backward. I spun the wheel wildly, turned the machine around, and sped out of the back room without looking back. I didn't stop until I crashed, gently, into a display of paper towels near the manager's office. I abandoned the machine right there, burst into the office, and told my supervisor I was quitting. I couldn't explain what I saw in a way that made sense, but I knew I could never go back into that silent, watchful store again. I never found out what it was, and I never want to. Thank you for spending this quiet night with me. I hope this story helped you drift a little closer to dreamland. If you enjoyed it, please like the video and subscribe for more soothing bedtime stories. Before you go, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing where all our sleepy souls are listening from. Until next time, rest well and dream peacefully.